So what happens when a king, a guy who has everything, suddenly realizes it's all meaningless? Well, he asks a question. And not just any question, but one that cuts right to the heart of reality itself. In this explainer, we're going to dive deep into an ancient text to follow his incredible quest for truth. We'll explore this idea of a cosmic illusion and, more importantly, the path to freedom from it. All right, so our story kicks off with a guy named King Nimi. Now, this isn't just any king. He's a powerful ruler. But here's the thing. He's deeply troubled. He looks at the world, at his kingdom, at everything, and all he sees is this endless cycle of suffering and happiness that just doesn't last. And he is desperate for an answer, a way out of it all. The text puts it so powerfully. It says he feels burned by the miseries of material life. Think about that for a second. Burned. This tells you he isn't looking for more gold or another kingdom. No, he's looking for medicine. He's searching for something that can actually heal that deep, fundamental suffering of just being. So what does he do? He gathers 9 of the greatest sages around and just lays it all out there with this incredibly direct, powerful question. He wants to understand Māyā, this concept of a grand cosmic illusion. And you got to understand, this isn't just him being curious. This is the central question of his entire quest. He's asking, what is this thing, this force that's so powerful it can fool even the greatest illusionists? The sages begin to answer, and their explanation starts with the nature of this illusion itself. And let me tell you, it's not just some simple trick. It's the very fabric of the material world we live in. So the sages explain that Māyā is this divine energy. It's the power that actually creates, maintains, and eventually dissolves everything we see. But it also has this binding effect. It makes us forget who we really are, our true spiritual nature, and instead makes us think we're just these temporary bodies, defined by our temporary circumstances. Okay, so how does this whole entanglement actually happen? This breakdown shows the process. It all starts with creation, right? Then consciousness enters into a physical form. But check out step 3, attachment. This is the critical moment. It's the turning point where the soul starts thinking, hey, this body, that's me. And from that one thought, it starts performing actions, getting results, good and bad, and boom, it's trapped in a cycle, just wandering from one life to the next. And the result of all this, a profound feeling of helplessness. The text really emphasizes that the soul isn't in control here. It's caught in this massive cosmic machine, just endlessly going through birth and death, creation and destruction. This really brings home why King Nimi was so desperate to find a way out. So to really drive home just how temporary this illusion is, the sages, well, they don't pull any punches. They paint this picture of the inevitable, super dramatic, and honestly terrifying end of the entire material universe. And it starts not with some big bang, but with this slow, agonizing silence. Picture this. For 100 years, not a single drop of rain falls. The whole world just starts to dry up, to bake under a sun that never lets up. Now, this isn't your average heat wave. The text says the sun becomes heated by time itself, which implies this cosmic, absolutely unstoppable force. It scorches everything, from the highest realms all the way down to the lowest. And if that wasn't enough, after the heat from above, a great fire just erupts from the very bottom of the universe. It's fanned by these cosmic winds, and it just rages upward, consuming literally everything in its path. After all that fire, you get the complete opposite. For another 100 years, these colossal clouds just pour down rain. The text describes the torrents as being as thick as elephant trunks. I mean, can you imagine? The entire universe is submerged in one single vast ocean. And this is the grand finale of the whole cosmic show. It's like reality is literally unwinding itself. You can see it right here. The fundamental elements dissolve, but in the reverse order of how they were created. So Earth dissolves into water. Then water gets absorbed by fire. Fire merges into air. And it just keeps going all the way up the chain until everything, even space itself, merges back into its source, the unmanifest self. Wild, right? So after that unbelievably dramatic vision of cosmic destruction, the king is probably thinking, okay, how do I get out of this? This is where the sages pivot from the problem to the solution. And the first path they talk about is the path of devotion, or Bhakti yoga. And before they even get into the how-to, the sages do something really smart. They show the why. This quote here, it paints a picture of the emotional state of someone on this path. This isn't some dry intellectual exercise. No way. It's a deeply emotional, even ecstatic experience of connection, one that just completely transcends all that suffering we talked about. It's about being totally, completely absorbed in bliss. So what exactly is Bhakti Yoga? Well, think of it as a way to redirect our natural tendency to love. I mean, we all do it. But instead of directing that love towards temporary things that are going to get destroyed anyway, this path channels all of that energy, every action, every thought, every word, towards the eternal supreme. Then the sages lay out a practical to-do list. It starts with faith and self-control. Then it moves into active things like hearing, chanting, and meditating. But it all culminates in this idea of offering everything. And we're not just talking about rituals. We're talking about a total commitment, dedicating your work, your family, your entire life to a higher purpose. Okay, this leads us to another path, one that's really deeply connected to the first. What about all the stuff we have to do just to live in the world? This next part completely reframes the whole idea of action itself. This is the king's next logical question. And let's be honest, it's a question we all face, right? How do we deal with our jobs, our families, all our daily responsibilities without getting tangled up even more in that cycle of karma? Well, the sage's answer is a concept called karma yoga. Now, this distinction is absolutely crucial, so let's break it down. You've got your standard action, or karma, right? That's when you do something for a personal result. I work so I can get paid. That kind of thinking binds you. But then there's karma yoga, selfless action. You might be doing the exact same work, but you're doing it without being attached to the outcome. You see it as an offering. So the action itself can be identical, but the consciousness behind it is what changes everything. And that's what leads not to bondage, but to real freedom. And here's a really fascinating insight. The sages admit that, yeah, some scriptures promise heavenly rewards if you do certain actions. But then they say, this is basically like offering a kid candy to get them to take their medicine. The rewards are just an incentive, a little something to get people started on the right path. The true goal was never the temporary reward. It's always been about ultimate liberation. And this is what it's all been leading to. This is the ultimate truth that the sages finally revealed to King Nimi. The self that we think we are, this body, this mind, this ego, it's all temporary. But our true self, the soul, that's eternal. It was never born. It will never, ever die. It's just pure, unchanging consciousness. This final insight really ties it all together. You might be asking, okay, so how do I experience this eternal self? The answer is through the purification of the mind. And how do you purify the mind? Through the very paths we just talked about, devotion and selfless action. When the mind is finally cleared of all those selfish attachments, the truth of who you are becomes self-evident. It's as clear and obvious as seeing the sun in the sky. And so, we're going to end by turning the king's question right back to you. The sages gave him their answer, an answer built on this incredible idea of an eternal soul living in a temporary world. But their answer really just leads to a new question, one that each of us has to think about. If we even entertain this idea that our true essence is permanent but everything around us is fleeting, what does that actually mean for how we live our lives right now? What is the ultimate purpose of all the things we do every single day?
Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your most ambitious questions and really plunge into the source material to find that clarity you're looking for. Today's mission, well, it's definitely ambitious. We're navigating some incredibly profound texts from ancient wisdom traditions. Our sources, submitted by you, the learner, they detail this fascinating exchange, a really deep philosophical dialogue between a king who's looking for, practical liberation and four immensely wise sages, and the core subject. It's nothing less than the nature of reality itself, cosmic cycles, and crucially, the definitive path to ultimate freedom. The king's first question immediately sets the scene. He asks about Māyā, this illusory energy of the Supreme Lord Viṣṇu. He wants to understand how anyone, even the most enlightened figures, can possibly comprehend this enchanting force that the text says bewilders even greatest illusionists.
It's a classic setup, but it feels deeply personal here. The king isn't just looking for some abstract knowledge. He specifically calls himself a mortal, Māyā, who is suffering. He describes himself as being scorched by the miseries of material life. The exact phrase is sasara tapa nistapta, literally, heated by the burning distress of the cycle of rebirth. It's quite graphic.
Yeah, that's a heavy burden to articulate. You can feel the desperation.
You really can. And his search for this divine story, this harikatamutam, he sees it as the only medicine for that suffering, tatapabengam. So our job, really, is to unpack that medicine from the detailed answers given by these four sages. Antarikṣa, Prabuddha, Pippalayanā, and Avrihotra. We're looking not just at how the universe works, but exactly why we get trapped in it, and, most importantly, the step-by-step instructions for getting out.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So let's start with the first sage, Antarikṣa. He seems to lay out the blueprint for the trap itself. Where does he begin? The creation.
Yes, Antarikṣa starts right at the beginning, with cosmology. He explains that the primordial being, the universal soul, or Bhutatma, created all types of life, both the higher forms and the lower ones, ukavakani, using the great elements, the mahabhute. And crucially, this wasn't just random.
Okay, so if it's not random, what is the purpose behind this huge cosmic undertaking? Why create everything?
The source is quite clear. The ultimate aim was for the realization of his own self. Svamatratma prasidhai. It was like a self-reflective act. Consciousness manifesting itself, exploring its own potential through all this diversity. You could almost think of it as the ultimate self-expression.
That's a massive idea to start with. Creation is divine self-discovery.
Right.
So if that's the goal, where does the illusion, the Māyā, come into play? Because right after creation, the Supreme Being does something, well, unusual. He enters his creation, but in a divided way.
Exactly. That's the precise moment the trap is set. The Supreme enters the beings he just created, but he splits his identification. He enters as the mind, that's the singular form, katha, and also as the 10 senses, the dashada. This division is what creates the foundation for individual, localized experience.
Okay, so the Lord is present right there in our mind and senses. How does that lead to illusion for the individual being, the Prabhu?
Well, the living being, which is illuminated by that divine spark, uses these tools, the senses, to interact with the world, to enjoy the world, which is made of the modes of nature, gacchaganan. The senses basically connect our inner awareness to the outer world's qualities. Now, the enjoyment itself isn't the problem. The issue starts with the misidentification that follow.
Right, that disastrous mistake. The source actually gives us the thought process, doesn't it? The inner monologue that starts the whole entanglement.
It does. The living being essentially mistakes the reflected light of the divine presence within them for their own independent power. They think, I have created this, manya mana ida salam. This is the birth of the false ego. That moment, the individual soul takes ownership of what is fundamentally a divine production. And the text says, right then and there, Sajate, they become attached.
Wow. You know, that's incredibly relatable, even outside of this specific context. Taking too much credit for success, thinking, I built this, or even just pride in our own bodies or abilities. It's that feeling of, I am the doer.
Precisely. That feeling, that false sense of being the independent agent, that's the hook. Once you bite, once that ownership is claimed, the whole cycle of karma, of consequences, inevitably kicks in. The embodied soul, the habit, starts performing actions, but now they have these specific self-serving goals, sanmimitani, and because of that, the soul has to accept the results, good or bad, tatat karma phalam.
So the soul loses its freedom right there. It's forced onto this roller coaster of happiness and distress, sukhaitaram. It's not choosing anymore. It's just reacting to the consequences of that initial mistake of ownership.
And Antarikṣa really paints a grim picture of where this leads. He says, wandering along these paths of karma, paths that are inherently full of misfortunes, bhavav hadravaha, the living being becomes completely helpless. Avasha, they're just dragged along, forced to undergo these repeated cycles of creation and destruction, sarga pralaya vashinte. It's a relentless, compulsory cycle of birth and death, all dictated by those earlier ego-driven choices. The illusion solidifies into an engine of suffering.
Okay, so if we're helplessly bound to these huge cycles, these sarga pralaya, we really need to grasp the scale of that destruction phase, which leads us, I think, right into what the second sage discusses, the total cosmic breakdown.
Exactly. What the second sage describes is the pralaya, the cosmic dissolution. And the source gives this incredibly detailed, almost terrifying picture of how the entire universe collapses. And it's driven entirely by time. Time is described as anadi nidhana kala, beginningless and endless time, the ultimate force.
Time, the great equalizer, or in this case, the great dissolver. So what happens when this beginningless, endless time decides it's time for the Dhatupaplava, the destruction of the elements.
Time starts pulling everything back. It takes the entire manifest universe, the Vyaktam, everything made of gross matter and subtle qualities, and draws it back into the subtle, unmanifest state, the Avyaktam. It's like the whole cosmic structure just folds back in on itself, reversing that creation process Antarikṣa described.
And this process starts with, well, an environmental catastrophe, a massive drought.
Yes. Stage 1 is Ulban Anavi, a terrible, overwhelming drought. And it lasts for 100 years, Shatabadai. During this whole century, the sun, which is superheated by the power of time, just scorches the three worlds, lokas trin pratapyati. Imagine a 100-year drought burning away all moisture.
That kind of intense heat must prepare everything for the next stage, right? Fire.
It does. Stage 2 is fire from below. The fire from the mouth of Sakakas, who is an expansion of the Supreme Being, starts blazing up from the lowest regions from Patala. It's fanned by the wind, and the text stresses its nature. It moves upward with upward flames, Rudvashiko, burning everything the drought didn't already desiccate.
Okay, so a century of scorching heat, then a global inferno starting from the bottom up. What's the final act in this destruction?
The final act is the ultimate flood, stage 3. After the fire, these destructive clouds appear, Savartako Megagatya, and these are not your average rain clouds. They pour down torrential rain for another full century. The description is amazing. The downpours are as thick as elephant trunks, Hasti Hastabir.
Wow, that image. 100 years of rain like elephant trunks. The force must be unimaginable. It says the universal form itself, the Virakura, actually dissolves in that water.
Salile viraliate. Exactly. Once that gross cosmic body is gone, the process shifts to the subtle level, the elemental cascade. The soul of the universal form gives up the gross body and enters the subtle unmanifest. The text compares it to a fire dying down when its fuel runs out near Intana Ivanola. It doesn't vanish, it just withdraws its active form.
Right. And now we get to the real physics of the dissolution, where the great elements themselves dissolve back into their subtler sources. What's the underlying principle here? It seems very systematic.
The key thing, and it's easy to miss, is that each element is defined by its unique quality, its tanmatra. Annihilation works by destroying that defining quality, which forces the element to revert to the next subtler element it came from.
Okay, let's trace that. Where does Earth start its dissolution?
Air acts first. Air strips Earth of its defining quality, smell. Once the smell is gone, Earth loses its earthness and transforms into water, Salilatvaya kalpate.
And water's defining quality is taste. So the next step must be removing taste.
Correct. Water is deprived of taste, and without that quality, it transforms into fire, or Jyotiya.
Fire's quality is form or color. What takes that away?
Darkness, tamasa. Darkness deprives fire of its form, causing fire to merge back into air, vayu. Air's quality is touch.
And space removes the quality of touch from air, so air merges into space, navas.
And finally, the ultimate influence of time removes space's last quality sound, and then space merges back into the self, atmani layat. This whole cascade really highlights how ephemeral our material reality is, just a temporary configuration of sensory qualities.
And at the same time, the individual subtle stuff, senses, mind, intelligence, even the building blocks of change, they all merge back into the false ego, the ahakram, that principle of, I am this body.
It's a complete cosmic rewind. Everything goes back to a latent state, purified of its temporary active forms, basically waiting for the next creation cycle. But crucially, for the soul still bound by karma, this dissolution is just a temporary break before the whole ride starts again.
Which brings us right back to the king's problem. If the universe itself dissolves so completely, and the soul is helplessly stuck in this loop that sarga pralaya vishnute, how can any of us, especially those the king calls crude-minded, the stula dio, possibly escape this? It seems like an unbreakable cycle. That sets up the next stage perfectly, right? Prabhuda, who answers the king's plea for a practical way out.
Exactly. The king asks, how can people, even those with limited understanding, easily anyas cross over this Māyā, which is otherwise insurmountable? He's basically asking for the accessible path, the shortcut.
And Prabhuda's answer starts, interestingly, not with a technique, but with finding the right person. The absolute prerequisite is approaching a spiritual master, a guru prapajeta. But the qualifications seem really specific.
They are. The guru has to meet two main criteria. First, they must be an expert in scripture and in the Supreme Brahman, meaning they get both the theory and the ultimate reality it points to. Second, they must be self-controlled and peaceful. The term used is upashamashram. It means they are an abode of peace. You need a guide who's actually reached the destination, not just read the map.
Once you find that guide, the path itself is defined by these devotional duties, the Bhagavata dharmas. Practices designed to please the Lord Hari. Let's break those down. Where does the internal work begin?
The core psychological shift is this kind of dual practice, detachment and attachment. You have to cultivate detachment of the mind from everything temporary, sarvado manasosagam, but you can't just leave a void. You simultaneously need to cultivate attachment and constant association with saintly people, saga kaziwa.
That tension is really interesting, letting go of the world but grabbing onto something spiritual.
Yeah.
It's not just about negation, it's about redirection. You're redirecting that basic human need for connection.
Exactly. You're swapping what your mind and emotions depend on. Instead of identifying with fleeting material things, you attach yourself to people focused on eternal truth. This creates the stability needed for the other internal work.
And that other work sounds like a complete ethical rewiring. We're talking compassion, Ādyaḥ, friendship, maitreya, and humility, prashrayam, towards absolutely everyone. How do those play out practically?
They define how you interact with the world. Compassion and friendship means seeing everyone as fundamentally connected and valuable, which naturally reduces conflict. Humility prevents that old mistake we talked about, taking false ownership, the ego trip, and these are paired with personal disciplines, things like cleanliness, austerity, tolerance, silence, study, simplicity, celibacy, nonviolence, and just staying balanced through life's ups and downs, heat and cold, praise and blame.
It sounds like a full-time commitment to self-awareness. That tolerance piece, Tidikaya, seems especially vital given the suffering the king mentioned.
It's huge. Tolerance is key to neutralizing the emotional sting of past karma. If you can stay steady whether things feel good or bad, the results of your past actions lose their power to dictate your mental state.
Okay, shifting to the more external disciplines, what's the main one for interacting with others?
It's pretty radical. Avoiding criticism of others, anindamanyatra, just don't find fault. Combine that with firm faith in the Bhagavata scripture, and it really reinforces that internal shift away from judging everything externally. The final external piece is control, total control over mind, speech, and action. Manava karmadam. If your thoughts, words, and deeds are aligned and disciplined, then those internal virtues actually have a chance to take root.
So once this whole ethical and self-control foundation is laid, the actual spiritual practice kicks in the ninefold process of devotion. This sounds like the active part of the bhakti path.
It is. This is the consistent practice focused directly on Lord Hari. It involves hearing about him, Shivantam, chanting his glories, Kirtanam, and meditating on him, Didam, specifically on his amazing births, activities, and qualities. It's not passive, it's actively engaging your mind and senses with the divine narrative.
And somehow, all your regular life activities have to get pulled into this, dedicating all your efforts for his purpose, tadartikalajetam.
Which leads directly to the peak of this path. Nivadamam, total surrender. And the list of what the devotee is supposed to offer up is, well, it's pretty staggering. They have to offer their sacrifices, charity, austerities, chanting, their good conduct, basically anything and everything that is dear to them.
And this is where the text really makes you pause.
Yeah.
It explicitly says to offer up one's wife, children, home, and even life itself, Garan Satan Gahan, to the Supreme Lord. That sounds extreme, especially to modern ears.
It's meant to be extreme. It's designed to shock the system, to break the final attachments. It's not necessarily advocating literal abandonment, but rather the complete surrender of the sense of ownership over these things. The devotee has to conceptually hold nothing back. The deep emotional attachment felt towards family and possessions must be transferred entirely to the divine. If you still claim mine over the things most precious to you, the false ego is still alive and well. Total surrender leaves the ego with no ground to stand on.
Wow. Okay, so if someone actually achieves this level of complete, utter surrender, what does that look like? What are the outward signs?
The signs described are dramatic, very emotional. These devotees actively seek out other realized souls. They form deep friendships and spend time mutually glorifying the Lord's purifying fame, Pavana Bhagavad Yasha. Internally, they experience such intense devotional ecstasy that their bodies show it. They get horripilation. Their hair stands on end, Udpulaka Tanum.
And their behavior during meditation on a sutta, it's described as almost wild, unpredictable.
totally outside normal social conventions. Sometimes they're weeping intensely, lost in thought. Other times they're laughing uncontrollably, rejoicing. Sometimes they speak words that seem otherworldly. Aokiko. They dance, they sing, they're completely consumed by this devotional flood. And then, ultimately, they fall silent, pavantitya, completely absorbed in supreme bliss, paramatya nirta. It's a path of raw, powerful emotion leading to transcendence.
And Prabhu's conclusion is starkly simple. By doing all this, the person devoted to Naraya easily crosses that insurmountable Māyā. So, okay, if we now know how to cross the illusion through this intense path of devotion and surrender, the king's next logical question is, what is the destination? What is this ultimate reality we're surrendering to?
Right. The king shifts gears from methodology to metaphysics. He asks the next sage, Pippalayanā, to define the ultimate shelter, the nita of Naraya, which is also called the Supreme Brahman. What exactly is this ultimate reality?
And Pippalayanā describes this ultimate reality, the param, using these deep paradoxes. He says it's the cause of creation, maintenance, and destruction, sthitopava pralaya hetu. Okay, that makes sense. But then he says it is itself causeless, a hetu. How can the cause of everything be causeless?
Well, think about it. If the Supreme Self had a cause, then that cause would be supreme, right? A hetu means it's uncaused. It's the buck stops here reality. It's the prime mover that doesn't need moving itself. It's the unconditional ground upon which all conditional existence, creation, maintenance, destruction plays out, but it remains completely outside the constraints of those processes.
And this reality isn't remote, it's everywhere. It exists in all our states of consciousness, dream, wakefulness, deep sleep, and even beyond them, bahishka. It's the constant background awareness.
It's the very life force. Pippalayanā says it's the entity by which the body, the senses, the life airs, and the heart are all animated, sanyivitani. Every single conscious experience, from a complex philosophical thought down to a simple feeling of warmth, is powered by this fundamental consciousness. Without it, the body is just inert matter.
But then, right after establishing it's the power behind everything, the sage hits us with another paradox. This supreme self cannot actually be reached by our usual tools, not by the mind, speech, eyes, life airs, or senses. If it powers them, why can't they perceive it?
This is where that fire analogy comes in, and it's really helpful. Just as flames can't enter back into the fire that produces them, the mind and senses are like tools, instruments that are projections of the self's energy. They're designed to interact with the external world, the manifested reality. They simply can't turn back on their own source and grasp it or contain it. It would be like trying to see your own eyeball directly, without a mirror. The instrument of sight can't see itself.
Okay, so if our minds and senses can't grasp it directly, how can we even talk about it or conceptualize it? The source says the self is beyond both assertion, like positive knowledge, bodhika, and negation, like limitations, nitataya.
This is getting into deep waters philosophically. If you try to assert something about the self, like it is X, you're limiting it, defining it by a quality. But if you try to negate something, it is not Y, you're still using the self as the implied background or subject of that negation. The text basically argues that without the self as the fundamental ground of consciousness, even the act of negating something wouldn't make sense or be possible. It's the absolute reality that precedes all relative descriptions.
Pippalayanā then tries to connect this very abstract reality back to our everyday world. He says the great energy, the Udu Shakti, that manifests as everything we experience, knowledge, action, objects, results, the whole functioning universe, basically is none other than Brahman.
Exactly. The entire operational mechanism of the cosmos is the power of Brahman in action. But, crucially, the ultimate nature of Brahman transcends even its own power and manifestations. It shines as both the manifest reality, the temporary world, Sat, and the unmanifest potential, Asat, but the ultimate truth is beyond both Tayo Pariyat.
And this directly confirms the nature of the individual soul, the Atma, right? It's never born, it never dies, it doesn't grow or shrink, it's just there. Indestructible, constant kiyasta, eternally present everywhere, as pure consciousness, anapaya upalabdhi matram. What does kiyasta really mean here? Unchanging.
Kiyasa literally means something like standing at the summit or firm like an anvil. It implies immovability, constancy. The soul is the passive, unchanging witness. It observes everything that happens, changes in the body, the mind, the world around it, but it remains fundamentally unaffected, like the screen on which a movie plays.
That idea of the unchanging witness helps make sense of the illusion of difference. If the self is one and kiyasta, why do we experience ourselves as billions of separate individuals?
The analogy used is the life air, the pruk. There's one fundamental life force in the body, Prati, but it seems divided because it operates differently through the eyes, ears, nose, etc., creating distinct, localized sensory inputs. Similarly, the one supreme self appears to take on all these different bodily identities, beings born from eggs, from wombs, from seeds, like trees, from moisture. It's the grand illusion of diversity masking an underlying unity.
And the proof, the everyday proof that the soul is this constant, unchanging witness is found in deep sleep.
That's the clincher. When you're in deep, dreamless sleep, your mind, your senses, your ego identity, they're all completely offline, dormant. Yet when you wake up, you have a distinct memory. I slept soundly, or I didn't dream. That memory proves that the witness, the core consciousness, the kies, the self, was continuously present and aware, even when the usual mental machinery was shut down. If the witness itself had switched off, there could be no memory bridging that gap.
Okay, so this ultimate unchanging reality is always here, always witnessing. But how do you achieve the direct realization of it, especially since we already established the mind can't just grasp it intellectually?
The path isn't through more thinking or analysis, it's through purification. The text says, when the impurities of the mind, impurities born from the modes of nature and past actions, karma, are washed away by intense devotion to the Lord's feet, then the truth of the self is realized directly, sak.
Ah, so that's the connection. The mind can't reach the self, but intense devotion, which is itself a function of the mind and emotions, acts like a cleansing agent. It removes the obstacles, the dirt on the mirror, that prevent the self from being clearly seen.
Precisely. The sun is always shining. Devotion just cleans the window pane. The final analogy Pippalina uses confirms this perfectly. It's like a person whose vision is clear finally beholds the light of the sun, Sabitrikrasha. Devotion purifies the inner instrument, the mind, allowing the eternally present self to be perceived without distortion.
That brings us full circle, almost. We've explored how the path of bhakti or devotion and what the nature of the Brahman or the Supreme Self. Now the king circles back to action. He asks the final sage of Yahotra about the path of karma yoga as a way to achieve that same ultimate freedom from action, that karmyam.
Yes, and this section is fascinating because the king throws in a curveball. He doesn't just ask for the method of karma yoga, he also asks why some previous great sages, Brahma's own sons, apparently got bewildered and couldn't answer the same question about action properly.
Right, that's intriguing. Why would great sages stumble over this? What's Yahotra's explanation for their confusion?
His answer is a really key insight into how scripture, especially the Vedas, works. He explains that the Vedic statements about action, karma, inaction, akarma, and forbidden action, vikarma, aren't just ordinary mundane instructions. The Vedas themselves are considered non-different from the Lord, Ashvarat Matvad. They originate from the transcendent.
So you can't just interpret them with everyday logic.
Exactly. Avirotra says the Veda often uses indirect language, paralada, especially when instructing those who are still ignorant or attached. It's like spiritual coaching tailored to the student's level. It prescribes certain actions, karma, but the ultimate goal of prescribing those actions is actually to liberate the person from the bondage of action altogether.
That sounds like a paradox again. You have to act in a specific way to become free from the need to act, or at least free from the consequences.
Precisely. The analogy given is medicine curing a disease. Ādyaḥ. You take the medicine, the prescribed Vedic action, to cure the underlying disease of material attachment and ego. But there's a very strong warning attached. Those who are ignorant or uncontrolled must follow these prescribed actions carefully. If they don't, if they just act randomly or whimsically, they risk falling into forbidden actions, vikaraman, and the result is terrible. They just keep going from death to death, mature matum upaiti sak.
The message seems clear. You can't just bypass the stage of purified action. So what is the crucial difference? What makes an action part of binding karma versus liberating karma yoga that leads to freedom, not karmyam?
It all comes down to the consciousness behind the action. You attain freedom from karma and reach perfection by performing those Veda-prescribed actions, but without attachment to the results, nisaga, and, this is key, by offering the action and its results to the Lord Arpatam Yujvari. The action itself might look the same externally, but internally, the absence of egoistic desire for the fruit is what transforms it from binding to liberating.
This then sheds light on something else in the Vedas, the promises of rewards. Do this ritual, get rain, do that sacrifice, go to heaven, the Phalashvitya. Yahotra says these are basically just bait.
Essentially, yes. He calls it Rokana Artha, meant merely for attraction, to make the path appealing. It's like spiritual marketing. The Veda says, hey, do this and you'll get this desirable material result. The person motivated by that desire starts performing the prescribed action. But through the process, through the discipline, the purification, and the focus on the divine, they ideally start to grasp the higher selfless purpose. They might come for the fruit, but stay for the liberation, eventually transcending that initial selfish motive.
Okay, so for someone who wants a very practical, hands-on method, something tangible to cut that knot in the heart quickly, the sage recommends arcana. This is the formal worship of Keshava, Lord Krishna, following specific rules, vitina, often detailed in texts called the Tantras.
Yes, arcana is like the structured, ritualistic application of karma yoga. It demands methodical practice, step by step, ensuring that every part of the process reinforces that internal surrender and non-attachment. The source lays it out almost like a technical manual.
Let's walk through some of those steps. It starts again with getting instruction from the guru, then choosing a deity form, one that really resonates personally. And then the focus immediately shifts to purity.
Absolute purity. The worshiper has to be purified, Shusyu. They sit in a purified space, purify their own body using breath control, pradasayamana, wear the proper sacred markings. Then they purify the seat, the ground, the water, all the offerings. It's meticulous preparation, both external and internal.
And the ritual itself involves things like arranging the offerings, performing yasa, placing mantras mentally or physically on the body, and then worshiping the deity form with the main mantra, offering things like water for bathing, clothes, ornaments, fragrant paste, flowers, incense, lamps.
It's a very detailed, sensory-rich form of service. It creates this focused, reverent atmosphere. You glorify the Lord with hymns, you bow down. But then comes the absolute core of it, the element that makes this yoga, not just ritual. While doing all this external worship, the devotee must constantly meditate on themselves as being one with the Lord Atmanana Tanmaya Tan.
So the goal isn't just to worship some external statue or image. The external actions, the service, are meant to be a mirror, a tool, to help realize that intrinsic oneness that Pippalana was talking about earlier. The ritual becomes a catalyst for metaphysical realization.
Exactly. You're performing acts of service, dedicating the results, but simultaneously holding the consciousness of unity, dissolving the sense of being a separate doer. You offer the action, you don't claim it. This perfectly fulfills the definition of nakarmyam, achieving freedom from action through action itself, by removing the ego from the equation.
Now, there's one final, really profound instruction that Virahatra gives. He broadens the scope significantly, saying where this liberating worship can actually happen. It's not just confined to a temple altar.
That's right. He lists 5 specific places or contexts where you can achieve liberation quickly by worshiping the Supreme Lord, seeing him as identical with your own self. These are in fire, in the sun, in water, in Gesatithau, and within your own heart.
Okay, the first few. Fire, sun, water, the heart. These seem like fairly standard sacred elements or locations in many traditions. But including the guest, the Ādyaḥ, that one stands out. Why equate a human visitor with sacred fire, or the sun, or one's own heart?
This is where it gets incredibly practical and radically transforms everyday life. An Ādyaḥ traditionally isn't just any visitor. It's someone who arrives without a fixed schedule, unexpectedly, a true guest. The sage is saying that this human being showing up at your door, perhaps in need, is a direct manifestation of the divine. They are as sacred, as worthy of worshipful service, as the ritual fire or the life-giving sun.
So hospitality isn't just good manners, it's a form of arcana, a spiritual practice. Treating your guest well becomes a path to liberation.
Precisely. By serving the guest, by seeing the Supreme Self residing within that person, you are performing the highest kind of non-attached action, karma yoga. It connects this very structured karma yoga path right back to the core ethics of Bhagavata Dharma that Prabhupada mentioned, compassion, friendship towards all. If you can dedicate your actions to the Lord, which is karma yoga, and simultaneously see the Lord present in every person who comes to you needing service, which blends bhakti and ethics, you've unified everything. Serving the guest becomes the ultimate real-world application of meditating on yourself as one with the Lord.
Okay, let's try and wrap our heads around all of this. We started with the king's really raw plea. How do we understand and cross over this crushing power of Māyā, this false ego that traps us in endless cycles of suffering?
And we saw the mechanism of that trap, didn't we? From Antarikṣa, how the soul mistakenly claims, I did this, taking ownership of what's really divine energy. Then we saw the scale of the cosmic reset button with the pralaya, confirming just how temporary everything we cling to actually is.
And then, crucially, the sages offered 2 powerful paths to freedom, to nakarmyam. First, that deeply emotional path of Bhakti Dharma from Prabhupada defined by total surrender, rigorous ethical purification, and that intense, sometimes wild devotion that ultimately cleanses the mind.
And second, the disciplined path of karma yoga from Avirhotra. This path uses meticulous, non-attached action, especially through ritual worship, arcana, but with the constant internal focus on realizing the underlying oneness of the individual self and the Supreme Self while performing that service.
And the insight from Pipalaya really ties it together that both paths, whether through emotional surrender or disciplined action, lead to the same place, that supreme, unchanging reality, the Kutesa Atman. The whole point of both devotion and discipline is purification, scrubbing away the mental grime so that eternal truth can be seen directly.
Yeah, the sages really gave comprehensive advice, covering everything from cosmology and ethics to deep metaphysics and detailed ritual. But maybe the most challenging and perhaps enduring piece they left us with is that very last instruction about where we find the divine in our daily lives.
Right, that the source says liberation comes quickly by worshiping the Lord in fire, the sun, water, and guests. Ādyaḥ.
What does that actually mean for us today? Living these often very busy, maybe digitally isolated lives, that one of the most potent, prescribed, holy places for worship is simply the human being who shows up at your home. It elevates every simple act of spontaneous service, every moment of generosity into a sacred act, an opportunity for liberation. It tells you the temple isn't just a building. It's potentially right there in your living room when someone needs something. That realization could really change how you see every single human interaction. It becomes a chance to realize the self.